Okay, let's dive right in. Here's a tough one for you. Imagine you get one unearned advantage at birth. Stunning beauty, the kind that just opens doors.
Yeah.
Or being born white in a society that, well, let's be honest, still leans that way. Which do you pick?
Oh,
And why is that question so prickly, so unsettling?
yeah, it is unsettling because it forces you right away to think about how unfair things can be from the get-go. That whole idea of a level playing field. This kind of question just pokes holes in it.
Exactly. And what jumps out is how different these privileges feel.
Yeah.
Beauty seems to give you these instant visible wins, a smile, maybe better service, that kind of thing.
hmm While white privilege, it's often more about what doesn't happen to you. Fewer obstacles, maybe, a smoother path because of these subtle societal defaults.
Yeah, it's less about, specific things happening and more about the background radiation, the stuff you don't face.
Precisely. It's the absence of certain negatives.
So picture this. You walk into a room. If you fit the conventional beauty standard,
hmm
maybe you feel it, right?
mm
People react differently. Opportunities might just appear.
That immediate visual power.
Right. But then there's the other side. The privilege where your race means you're maybe less likely to be viewed with suspicion, or you're assumed competent without, having to prove it quite as hard. It's a different kind of weight, isn't it?
Totally different. One is loud, almost. The other is quiet, systemic.
A whisper versus a scream.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that tangibility, the immediate feedback of beauty privilege that really shapes how we first perceive it, it feels very direct.
Those quick, maybe even superficial wins, like you negotiate a better deal because you charmed someone, seems straightforward.
Whereas white privilege is more like compound interest, small advantages, maybe unnoticed, building up over a lifetime, often invisible to the person benefiting.
And isn't it fascinating how society talks about these? Or
Yeah.
doesn't talk about them. We have these huge, necessary conversations about systemic racism,
Mm.
but beauty privilege.
Often gets brushed off, like, oh, that's just superficial or that's just life.
Yeah. Could that dismissal, that shrug,
Hmm.
could that itself be a kind of privilege? A way of not looking at another layer of unfairness?
That's a really critical point. What do we choose to see as a real problem? Dismissing beauty privilege might be convenient because it lets us ignore another way the playing field is tilted. Both create skewed opportunities, even if they work differently.
Think about scrolling through your phone, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. It's
Yeah.
just a flood of curated beauty, right? Reinforcing these really narrow ideals.
Constantly. Unavoidably.
Okay, now ask yourself,
Yeah.
do you see the mechanics of white privilege laid bare like that every single day in your feed? Probably not.
No, it's much less visible in that immediate visual way. Media definitely amplifies the beauty narrative. It makes you wonder what gets amplified and what stays sort of hidden in the background noise.
Which kind of brings us to this. Okay, another tough hypothetical. Imagine you found out, with concrete proof, that your looks directly cost someone else a job they deserved just as much. Or imagine you got undeniable proof that your race, completely unconsciously on your part, smoothed your path while actively blocking someone else.
Mm.
Which truth bomb feels heavier?
That's hard. The first one, the beauty one, feels so personal. Like your face did that. It's a direct line.
Right. Very direct
The
consequence.
second one, the race one,
Yeah.
it's huge, obviously, systemic, but
Mhm.
your individual role feels, I don't know, maybe more diffuse, easier to distance yourself from, perhaps, or rationalize.
Yeah, maybe less like you personally did something, even though you benefited. I remember this story. Someone super talented, really skilled, but just didn't fit the mold looks-wise.
Okay.
Kept getting passed over for promotions. Less qualified people, but more.
hmm
Conventionally attractive, kept getting ahead. This person felt totally cheated by the system.
I bet.
Were they wrong? Or were they just hyper-aware of one type of bias, the aesthetic one, because it was hitting them so directly?
Well, that's the tricky part, isn't it? In their lived experience, that aesthetic bias probably felt like the biggest, most immediate wall. But who knows what other factors, maybe related to race or other identities, were subtly at play in how they were perceived overall. It's rarely just one thing.
So, back to that idea of tangibility. Does beauty privilege feel more real? Just because you can see its effects instantly. A smile, a door held open, whatever.
While white privilege is like an invisible current gently pushing you along, maybe you don't even feel it.
Yeah. Is not seeing it or not feeling it a failure of empathy? Or maybe just imagination. Socrates is all about self-examination, right?
Yeah.
Looking inwards.
He certainly was, and it touches on how powerful the visible is.
Hmm.
Our brains latch on to immediate sensory stuff. White privilege, because it's often defined by the lack of bad experiences, the things you don't face.
Yeah.
Well, that's just harder to grasp if you're the one benefiting.
So that self-examination Socrates talked about, it takes real effort. You have to actively try to see beyond your own bubble.
Exactly. You have to consciously question your assumptions, actively seek out other perspectives.
And these things, beauty standards and racial hierarchies, they didn't just pop up separately, did they? Historically, they're tangled up.
Oh, deeply. Absolutely. Think about the history of white supremacy. Part of building that was literally constructing an aesthetic hierarchy, defining certain features, usually European ones, as inherently better, more beautiful, more civilized.
Right, so the ideas reinforced each other.
Completely. Colonialism, eugenics. They both leaned heavily on these manufactured hierarchies of beauty that mapped directly onto race. You can't understand one without understanding how it connects to the other.
Okay, let's try a quick personal check-in
Oh.
for you listening. Think about the last time you made a snap judgment based purely on someone's looks. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, think about the last time you consciously recognized systemic racial bias affecting a situation. Which one felt more automatic, like a reflex?
For many people, I suspect the aesthetic judgment is almost instantaneous. We're just so conditioned by the images we see constantly.
Yeah. And recognizing the systemic stuff
Hmm.
that often takes more deliberate thought, right? Stepping back, looking at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
beyond the individual interaction.
It requires a different kind of mental muscle, definitely.
It's almost like we might feel a quick flash of resentment, maybe even envy, if someone seems to get ahead just because they're attractive.
Yeah, that feeling of, that's not fair in a competitive sense.
But questioning the advantages that might come just from our race,
Hmm.
that feels different, more uncomfortable. Why is that truth harder to sit with?
Well, confronting racial privilege can feel like it's challenging your own story, right?
Yeah.
Your sense of self, your achievements. It might bring up guilt or defensiveness. It's closer to the bone, perhaps.
Okay, Sark choice time, a life-saving opportunity. Two equally qualified people. One is incredibly attractive, but from a historically oppressed group. The other is considered unattractive, but is white. Who gets the chance?
Wow.
What's your gut reaction? Just the immediate flicker of a thought. Does it make you squirm a little?
Scenarios like that, they're designed to expose those deeply buried biases, aren't they? The assumptions we make without even realizing it about who deserves what or who fits where.
And that gut reaction, even if we correct it consciously, it tells us something about the programming we've absorbed.
It really does. It shows how complexly these different forms of privilege and disadvantage interact in our subconscious.
And you see this playing out everywhere, right? Beauty can absolutely be social currency. It can open some doors, even within racial hierarchies.
Sure, it can give you an edge in certain interactions, social capital.
But then you zoom out. Look at the big structures, corporations, government, media leadership. Does white privilege often set a kind of baseline advantage there, almost regardless of looks?
Often, yes. When you analyze those fundamental power structures, race frequently plays a more foundational role in determining who gets access, who gets the benefit of the doubt across the board. Beauty might get you noticed, but race can determine if you're even in the game.
Okay, rapid fire. Would you trade your race for supermodel looks, your looks for racial majority status? If you could snap your fingers and dismantle one system of unearned advantage beauty privilege or white privilege, which one goes and why?
See, the hesitation, the difficulty in even answering, that tells you something right there.
It forces you to weigh things that feel almost unweighable. It exposes the values and maybe the fears tangled up in how we see these things.
Exactly. What are we really prioritizing? What are we afraid of losing or confronting?
I'll put myself out there.
Yeah.
I really believe in fighting for racial justice. It's fundamental.
Mhm.
But I still notice attractive people. Maybe I'm quicker to smile, pay a bit more attention sometimes. Is that just human wiring? Or is it a subtle hypocrisy I need to own?
I think that internal conflict is incredibly common. Recognizing our own biases, even when they seem to contradict our core principles.
Well, that's crucial for self-awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jung talked about the shadow self, right?
Yeah.
The parts of us we don't always want to look at.
Yeah, acknowledging the shadow. Someone put it beautifully once. White privilege is the invisible wind at your back.
Beauty privilege is the spotlight on your face.
That's a great metaphor.
One is this constant, subtle push forward you might not even notice. The other is glaring, immediate attention, which feels more powerful.
It really depends on the situation, doesn't it? The win implies the steady, systemic advantage over the long haul. The spotlight is intense, immediate impact, good or bad. The perceived power can shift moment to moment.
And that spotlight, that judgment based on looks, it can feel incredibly raw and immediate.
Absolutely. Visceral.
So in those short-term interactions, the sting of being judged negatively for your looks or the little boost from being admired, that can feel more acutely real than the systemic background hum of racial privilege, especially if you're benefiting from it.
It can feel more real in the moment. But, and this is crucial, acknowledging that immediate feeling doesn't diminish the profound, pervasive impact of systemic racism.
Not at all. They operate on different levels. One is acute, the other chronic, maybe.
That's a good way to think about it. And we have to hold space for acknowledging both without letting one cancel out the other.
It's quite telling, though, when you look at where society puts its money and energy. Think about the billions spent on cosmetics, surgery, fashion-enhancing appearance.
Huge industries.
Compare that to the resources, and often the political will, dedicated to seriously dismantling systemic racism, often met with backlash, controversy.
The disparity is stark. It really does make you question our collective priorities. What do we value more, fixing the surface or fixing the foundations?
Let's get uncomfortably honest again, for you listening. Can you think of a time you maybe consciously used your looks to get something, even something small? And can you think of times you might have benefited from assumptions based on your race without even realizing it was happening?
That's a tough pair of questions.
Which one feels more like a deliberate strategy? Which feels more like just the default setting you didn't choose but benefited from anyway?
That internal honesty is key. Using your looks might feel like playing a hand you were dealt. Benefiting from racial privilege often feels like nothing at all because it's woven into the fabric of the everyday. It's the norm, the invisible baseline.
Consider this data point. Studies show attractive defendants often get shorter sentences.
Right, the beauty penalty, or lack thereof.
And we also know, tragically, that white defendants generally receive shorter sentences than black defendants for similar crimes. So what happens at the intersection? Attractive and white. Is that like privilege squared?
It certainly suggests a compounding effect. Both aesthetic bias and racial bias can tilt the scales within systems like the justice system. An attractive white person might indeed benefit from multiple layers of unearned advantage. It shows how these aren't separate tracks. They cross over and amplify each other.
Now flip it. Imagine lacking both conventional attractiveness and belonging to a racially marginalized group. Which system feels like the heavier weight to carry then?
For someone living at that intersection, the disadvantages can absolutely be compounded. It's not really about picking which one is worse.
Right.
It's about how they interact to create this complex web of barriers. It can feel like fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously.
We like to believe the world is basically fair or that people get what they deserve. But maybe, deep down, there's a little voice that thinks, well, beautiful people. Maybe they kind of deserve the perks. Beauty is a gift, right?
That tendency to see beauty as a natural merit is strong.
And maybe we downplay white privilege because admitting it means admitting the game is rigged, even for us, if we benefit. It disrupts our story of purely earned success.
Absolutely. Comfort versus truth. We often gravitate towards explanations that uphold our sense of fairness or justify existing hierarchies. Confronting the idea that advantages are unearned requires challenging those deep-seated beliefs.
Think about the Titanic sinking. Who had the best odds of getting into a lifeboat?
Wealthy white passengers, especially women and children within that group.
Exactly. Maybe someone's beauty caught an officer's eye for a fleeting second, but ultimately, your wealth and your race were the overwhelming factors determining survival.
It's a stark illustration, isn't it? Some advantages are like ripples on the surface beauty, maybe charm in the moment. Others are the deep, powerful tides class, race. Don't mistake the ripple for the tide.
That's powerful. Which leads me to this thought that's been brewing. Maybe this whole debate, which privilege is more real? Which is worse? Maybe it's a trap.
How so?
Maybe asking us to compare them is a distraction. It keeps us arguing about the details of the cages instead of asking why the cages exist at all. It pits groups against each other, maybe.
That's a really critical insight. Focusing on a hierarchy of oppression can absolutely divert energy from the collective work of dismantling all systems of unearned advantage. It allows the beneficiaries of one system to potentially ignore the other.
And what about our own sense of achievement? What if we have to face the idea that our earned success wasn't entirely earned, that our looks played a part we didn't acknowledge, or that our narrative of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps conveniently ignores the tailwind of racial advantage?
That's deeply challenging to the ego, isn't it? To our core story about
Yeah,
ourselves.
it can feel like it shakes the very foundation of your identity.
But that self-interrogation, however uncomfortable, is vital if we want a clear picture of how things actually work. It's about moving beyond a simplistic view of meritocracy.
Maybe beauty privilege and white privilege, despite feeling so different, are fundamentally just. Different flavors in the same thing, like winning different lotteries you didn't buy tickets for.
hmm Unearned advantages handed out at birth. Nietzsche's idea of perspectivism fits here too, right? Our reality, our understanding of these things is inherently shaped by where we stand.
Recognizing both as fundamentally unearned throws that whole level playing field idea out the window. It forces us to confront the randomness, the arbitrariness of it all.
It certainly does.
Okay, let's try that mic drop again, maybe amplify it. Beauty privilege screams for attention.
Hmm.
White privilege whispers in the corridors of power.
Hmm.
But a whisper in the right ears that can change laws, shape policies, rewrite history. Don't mistake volume for impact.
That really lands. The loud, visible nature of beauty bias versus the quiet, pervasive, often structural nature of racial bias. One gets noticed, the other gets embedded.
So, circling all the way back to that first question, beauty or whiteness, if you still have a quick, easy answer after all this, maybe you haven't wrestled with the knots enough.
Yeah, the discomfort is the point, isn't it? If it feels complicated and messy, that's probably a sign you're engaging with the reality of it.
A neat answer probably means you've skipped over the hard parts.
Precisely. The lack of an easy answer reflects the complex, interconnected nature of these privileges.
Could our society's obsession with beauty, the endless focus on image, appearance, youth, could it be a kind of collective distraction
A distraction from what?
from looking at the deeper, messier, maybe uglier power structures,
Right.
like race, like class? Does focusing on the surface keep us from tackling the foundations?
It's certainly possible. The intense focus on individual aesthetics can definitely draw attention away from collective systemic issues. It makes inequality seem like an individual problem to be solved with makeup or surgery, rather than a societal structure to be dismantled.
Is it objectively worse to be judged negatively for your look, something so personal, or to face systemic barriers due to race, something so historical and pervasive? There's no real answer, is there?
No, there isn't. And trying to rank them is probably unhelpful. They're just different kinds of injustice, different ways people are harmed or held back unfairly.
Both are damaging. Both limit human potential.
Recognizing them as distinct but equally valid forms of injustice is key.
Someone used this analogy. Beauty privilege is like volatile crypto. High potential gains, high risk, value fluctuates wildly based on perception.
Okay, I like
Like-
that. And a white privilege.
Is like stable, inherited real estate. Quietly accumulates value, provides security, often taken for granted by the inheritor.
That's quite insightful. It captures the ephemeral, market-driven nature of beauty versus the entrenched, often invisible solidity of racial privilege. Both create unearned value just through different mechanisms.
Imagine really looking someone in the eye. Someone just as smart, just as capable as you, but they didn't get the chance because of how they look or because of their race. Can you square that? Can you honestly look them in the eye and say, the outcome was fair?
That direct human element, it cuts through the abstraction, doesn't it? It forces you to confront the human cost of these systems. And usually the honest answer has to be, no, that wasn't fair.
Okay, a little homework for you listening. Grab a piece of paper or just do it in your head. 2 lists. List 1. Times you think you might have benefited, even slightly, from your appearance. List 2. Times you might have benefited from racial assumptions or the lack of racial barriers, maybe without even realizing it at the time. Which list is harder to populate? And why do you think that is?
That exercise, it can be really revealing about our own blind spots. Often, I suspect, the second list, the racial privilege one, is harder for those who benefit from it.
Why? Because it's less conscious,
Yeah.
more invisible.
Exactly. It's the water we swim in. The advantages from appearance might feel more like specific events, easier to recall maybe. The racial advantage is often the background condition.
It's also striking. You see people who are incredibly passionate about racial justice, really vocal, but they seem completely oblivious to, say, aesthetic favoritism happening right in front of them.
Or the reverse, right? Someone might complain about lookism, but be blind to their own racial privilege.
Yeah, it's like we have these selective vision filters. We see the injustices that affect us or the ones society has trained us to see, but we miss others.
It highlights how our own positionality shapes what we perceive as unfair. Acknowledging all forms of bias, even those we don't personally experience, requires real empathy and effort.
I heard this quote from a woman of color, and it just stuck with me. She said, "Being beautiful sometimes gets me in the door. Being black often keeps me from owning the house."
Wow. That says so much about intersectionality, doesn't
All
it?
right, that point where different identities collide. Beauty might offer a small conditional entry pass, but the larger structure, the racial structure, can still block ultimate access or ownership.
It perfectly illustrates how privileges and disadvantages don't just add up, they interact in complex, often compounding ways.
So again, why do we even debate which is more real? What's the point? Does it help dismantle anything? Or does it just let people who benefit from one kind of privilege feel okay about ignoring the other?
I lean towards the latter. Debating hierarchies of oppression can be a way to deflect, to minimize, to avoid responsibility. It distracts from the fundamental issue. Unearned advantage itself is the problem, whatever form it takes.
We talk about race as a social construct, obviously. But beauty standards,
Mm.
we often treat those as if they're just natural, like laws of physics.
hmm Biological destiny, almost.
But aren't they constructed too? Don't they change over time, across cultures? Aren't they also used to uphold power?
Absolutely. While there might be some evolutionary psychology arguments, what society deems beautiful is overwhelmingly shaped by culture, media, and, yes, existing power structures, including racial ones. They are absolutely constructed and reinforced daily.
And you don't have to be actively racist to benefit from white privilege. You just exist within the system.
Correct. Passivity is enough.
Does the same apply to beauty privilege? You don't have to actively leverage your looks. The world just responds differently. And maybe just accepting that differential treatment without questioning it is a form of complicity.
I think that's a fair parallel. Benefiting from any systemic advantage without active malice is common. The privilege lies in not having to think about it, not having to fight against it. Recognizing that passive benefit is the first step towards questioning the system itself.
Who gets to decide what's beautiful anyway? Who defines whiteness and attaches power to it? Are these definitions fixed? Or are they always shifting, being fought over, being used by those in power?
That's a fundamental question of power. Historically, dominant groups have defined these categories to their advantage, but these definitions are never totally stable. They're constantly being challenged and renegotiated from the margins.
I have to admit, I used to kind of dismiss the beauty privilege thing. Seemed less serious compared to race.
A common reaction.
Then I realized that dismissing it actually served the bigger system. It kept the focus narrow. It implied some kinds of unfairness or just.
Acceptable background noise. Trivial.
That's a crucial shift in understanding. Recognizing how different forms of bias support each other, even if they seem different in scale or scope, is key to seeing the whole picture. Minimizing one can inadvertently strengthen others.
Maybe the core of privilege isn't just about the extra stuff you get. Maybe it's more about what you don't have to deal with.
Yes, the absence of friction, the microaggressions you don't endure, the suspicions you don't face, the assumptions that always work for you, not against you, the doors that just swing open without you even pushing.
That concept of privilege as the freedom from certain burdens is incredibly powerful. It highlights the constant energy expenditure required by those who don't have that privilege just to navigate daily life.
So for everyone listening, there's probably some unearned advantage touching your life, maybe small, maybe significant, something you benefit from without thinking, maybe something you're even hesitant to name out loud. Can you identify it?
That kind of honest self-reflection is, well, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary work if we're serious about understanding inequality.
Think about that feeling. Maybe you felt it, of being invisible next to someone stunningly beautiful. Now think about the feeling of being hyper-visible, constantly scrutinized and judged because of your race.
Two very different kinds of painful exposure or lack thereof.
Both create wounds, right? In different ways.
Mhm.
So why are we so obsessed with comparing them, ranking them? It seems futile,
Yeah.
maybe even disrespectful to the pain caused by both.
Exactly. Comparing suffering is rarely productive. Recognizing the validity of different kinds of harm stemming from different biases allows for more solidarity and understanding.
It's like arguing whether it's worse to drown in salt water or fresh water.
You're still drowning. The injustice is the drowning, not the specific composition of the water.
Exactly. The fundamental unfairness is the point.
And this brings us back to intersectionality, because people aren't just one thing, are they? You can be white, but face class barriers. You can be conventionally attractive, but face homophobia. You can be black and beautiful and still face racism.
We all live at these crossroads of identity.
Mm-hmm. Our experiences of privilege and disadvantage are woven together based on all the different parts of who we are. It's complex, messy, sometimes contradictory.
Which leads to this kind of existential question. If you stripped away your looks, your race, what's left? Who are you, fundamentally? And why does that question feel so destabilizing?
It's unsettling because those categories, however arbitrary or constructed, have profoundly shaped our lives, our experiences, our sense of self, and how the world interacts with us. Imagining ourselves without them forces us to confront how much they define us, for better or worse.
And maybe you can't truly want to dismantle a system if you're secretly, maybe unconsciously, enjoying the little perks it gives you.
That's a hard truth. Admitting complicity, admitting that we benefit, even in small ways, from unfair systems, that's often the biggest hurdle.
It requires acknowledging the comfort, the subtle power, before you can genuinely be willing to give it up for the sake of fairness.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond denial.
Okay, another thought experiment. Two possible futures. World A, beauty privilege is gone. Looks don't matter for opportunity, but racial hierarchies still firmly in place. World B, race is completely irrelevant. True racial equality, but beauty standards still intense, still driving opportunities and judgments. Which world feels closer to fair? Or maybe which feels less unfair?
Wow, that's a tough one. Again, it forces a choice between two deeply ingrained forms of hierarchy.
And the difficulty in choosing. It just underlines how pervasive both are, doesn't it? Choosing feels like accepting one form of deep unfairness to get rid of another.
It highlights that a truly just world needs to address both, and likely many other forms of hierarchy, too.
And our personal preferences. Who we find attractive. That's not neutral, is it? It's shaped by culture, by media, by the very power structures we're talking about, and it reinforces them.
Precisely.
And just accepting the racial status quo because it's comfortable or familiar, that's not neutral either. These aren't just personal tastes or passive states. They're inherently political acts that prop up the existing systems.
Recognizing the political dimension of our seemingly personal preferences and assumptions is crucial. Our choices, our attention, our acceptance, they all contribute to maintaining or challenging these structures.
How do you think people 100 years from now will look back on our conversations today? About beauty, about race? Will they see us as having made progress? Or will they think, wow, they were still caught up in such primitive ways of dividing people?
It's a humbling question. Hopefully they'll see progress, but they might also see blind spots we can't yet recognize in ourselves. It prompts us to ask if we're truly challenging the core issues or just rearranging the furniture on the deck.
It feels like a paradox sometimes, talking about beauty privilege. Does it help or hinder the conversation about white privilege? Beauty feels more universal, maybe less politically charged for some. Does that make it an easier entry point? Or does it dilute the focus on deeper historical injustices?
It could potentially do both. It might make some people more receptive to the idea of unearned advantage in general, but it could also risk trivializing the conversation or distracting from the specific mechanisms and history of racial oppression. It's complicated.
Full confession. I know I've judged people for benefiting from white privilege while in another moment felt a pang of envy towards someone just because they were incredibly beautiful. That hypocrisy is uncomfortable.
But acknowledging it is vital, isn't it? Pretending we're perfectly consistent, that we're immune to these feelings or biases, that feels like a bigger failure.
Yeah, maybe owning the contradictions is the only way to be truly honest.
Jung would likely agree. Embracing the complexity, the shadow, is part of the path toward wholeness, or in this context, towards more genuine moral engagement.
So look, we're all swimming in these currents, benefiting here, maybe disadvantaged there, often at the same time. The goal isn't to reach some impossible state of perfect fairness or moral purity in ourselves.
No, that's likely unattainable.
Maybe the real goal is just a more brutal, uncomfortable, honest awareness. An awareness of the currents themselves and how they carry us.
Yes, a critical consciousness. Understanding the dynamics at play, both internally and externally, That awareness, even if unsettling, is the necessary foundation for any meaningful action or change.
So when we ask which privilege feels more real, maybe the only honest answer is it depends. It depends on who you are, where you are, what barriers or boosts you're encountering in that specific moment. It's contextual.
The lived experience of privilege is subjective and situational. What feels most impactful can shift dramatically based on context and individual identity.
Okay, final thought, the real mic drop. Stop asking which cage is prettier, which one is gilded better.
Hmm.
Start asking, why are there cages in the first place?
Hmm.
And maybe the toughest question, who handed you the key you didn't earn?
That shifts the focus entirely, doesn't it? From comparing privileges to questioning the very existence of systems based on unearned advantage and confronting our own unearned keys. That's the crucial challenge.
So if this deep dive made you feel a bit uncomfortable, or if something really hit home, good. That's not a bad thing. Discomfort can mean something's shifting. Recognition is the first step.
Absolutely. These aren't easy topics with simple answers. The aim is to provoke thought, to encourage that deeper, maybe uncomfortable reflection. That's where learning happens.
And if this conversation sparks something for you, maybe share it. Especially with people who might usually shy away from stuff that feels too complicated. Let's try and spread these important, messy conversations.
Yeah, making complex ideas more accessible and encouraging dialogue is vital.
So we'll leave you with this final question to chew on. Is it possible that our intense, maybe even obsessive focus on beauty, on achieving it, judging it, consuming images of it, actually serves a purpose?
Hmm.
Does it act as a kind of collective smokescreen, keeping our eyes fixed on the surface and distracting us from seeing, really seeing, and maybe finally tackling the deeper, more entrenched power structures, like race, that shape our lives in such profound ways?